Okay, hi everybody. As usual, we've got a lot to discuss this morning, so let's go straight to the agenda of this morning's Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny panel meeting, beginning with a welcome. So good morning, colleagues, and thank you for your attendance today. As always, it's a pleasure to be in the chair, guiding us through the important business of today's meeting. A reminder that we're currently being webcast, so welcome to people watching online. And also, if the fire alarm goes off during the course of the meeting, this will not be a test, and I would therefore ask that you make your way to the assembly point via the emergency fire exits, here, here and here, always wanted to do that, basically follow Sam, who will guide us out of the building. I would like us to conduct the meeting with the same level of respect as we always do, leaving party politics at the door, please, and I hope that that approach works for you all. Okay. So we've got a fantastic array of people with us today, including 3 cabinet members, some very senior officers, and so I'm sure we're going to have a full meeting. So let's move on to item 2, declarations of... Oh, sorry. Have we got any apologies or name substitutes? That's the next bit, isn't it? Sorry, Sam.
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Seb James, Richard Tudge and Parent Governor Representative Tim Reid.
Thank you very much. Council colleagues, do we have any declarations of interest or party whip? No, don't see any. Okay. We have no public participation today. So we'll move straight on to agenda item 4, which is confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. Do colleagues have any points of accuracy they want to raise in relation to the minutes? No. Okay, that's great. I shall sign them as a true record at the end of the meeting. Moving swiftly on to the first of our discussion points. So agenda item 5, educational outcomes of the 2024-25 academic year, including Ofsted update. During this item, we'll be receiving an update in relation to the educational outcomes for children and young people educated in Worcestershire schools during the last full academic year, including a focus on the outcomes for disadvantaged children and young people generally, and those with special education needs and disabilities. In addition to this, we'll receive an overview of Ofsted inspections of Worcestershire state-funded schools for the academic year 2024-2025. And in attendance for this item, we have Councillor Stephen Foster, Cabinet Member for Education and SEND, Adam Johnston, Director of Children's Services, Sarah Wilkins, Assistant Director, Education, Early Years, Inclusion and Education Place Planning, and Jane Howard. Welcome, Jane. I think it's the first time you've been since I've been in the chair, so nice to see you. Jane's lead for School Improvement Services and Moderation Manager. Before we hear from officers, just to clarify that as councillors, we're being asked to consider and comment on the educational outcomes report, agree any comments to highlight to the Cabinet member and determine whether any further information or scrutiny on a particular topic is required. So we've all read the report, I'm sure. So over to Sarah, I think, who's going to take us through the headlines and the key things of note. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. And Councillor McVeigh, I think you've just done a fantastic introduction, so I won't need to say too much before I hand over to Jane for the headlines. But yes, thank you for receiving this. It's an annual paper that we bring to Scrutiny panel, referring to our children's educational outcomes for the previous academic year, as Councillor McVeigh explained. It's funny actually because it is Standard Attainment Week this week for Key Stage 2 children, so we're back in another testing week. We have to wait till this point in the year to publicise this report because the external attainment tests have to be validated through the year by the Department for Education. It's quite a technical paper in terms of the topic and the detail of the data, but Jane will take you through. Jane will take us through the headlines, particularly to explain the changes and trends. And the paper does provide oversight of all children, but particular detail for our most vulnerable groups. And we also, the paper includes a section on the work of the school improvement team and their statutory function for the local authority, and an update on the Ofsted inspection framework. So Jane will be looking back, but I think quite helpfully as well give a current position in terms of the new Ofsted framework and the progress on that. So I think really I will just hand over to Jane for the headlines. Thank you.
Perfect. Welcome again, Jane. I look forward to hearing what you perceive as the key points in this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. As Sarah said, it's quite a technical paper. It takes us through outcomes for all children in Worcestershire and then breaks it down into those children who are deemed to come from a disadvantaged background, children who are looked after, and children with special educational needs. With your permission, I'll look at the outcome data first and then pause for questions and then take you through the new initiatives and the Ofsted, separate it that way. So what's going well then? You'll see from the paper there are a number of points where children are tested, and this is compared locally with, national outcomes. Lost my train of thought there. This starts with GLD. This stands for Good Levels of Development. There are a number of ways in which our children are tested within the first year that they enter school life. These include English, maths, fine motor control, personal development, managing self, etc. We do really well in GLD generally. Our outcomes are always in line or above national, and this is a particular strength for us. Where it is less successful is for our disadvantaged children, and I'll talk more widely about that as we go through the paper. You'll see then we're tested again at phonics. This is children's ability to decode and decipher sounds, called graphemes and phonemes, technical language there for you. And this has become a huge focus in national picture, because reading is deemed as the gateway to all learning. You know, if you cannot read, then you cannot access the rest of the curriculum. And again, our phonics outcomes are particularly strong, and there is a trend there. This year, for members' interest, I've tried to present the data in a 3-year trend in tables, because previously it had been in a narrative, which I know people found difficult to keep track of. I can see people nodding. SEND outcomes are also favourable. Children with SEN are doing particularly well in a number of areas, and this continues to be a pattern for us. Let's talk then around areas that are not quite as strong for us. Our Key Stage 2 outcomes, that's children who are tested at the end of primary, continue to be a significant challenge for us. And this is specifically around our outcomes for disadvantaged children. We are heavily involved in a number of projects nationally and locally, which I will go through in a minute. But we are struggling to see an upturn in our outcomes there. We've focused really heavily in the last 18 months, and we are, making many positive inroads around the disadvantaged outcomes. We hope to see some improvements in the 25-26 outcomes, but you can see from the data this has remained an area of focus for us. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds are a national focus, but in Shire counties it is something that we see across other local authorities as a particular area of challenge. For Worcestershire, it sits in white British boys. A number of our white British boys are underperforming, and that starts at GLD. So on entry into early years, children from disadvantaged backgrounds are already 4.7 months behind their peers. By the time they get to Key Stage 2, that's grown to 10 months, and by the time they get to GCSE, that's grown to 19 months behind. Children from backgrounds which are deemed to be disadvantaged, low income, non-working families, tend to come with what is known as a vocab deficit. So if you are a 5-year-old entering reception, you will have heard on average fewer than 30 million words compared to your cohort. So you'll have been exposed to so much less language development as a child from a disadvantaged background. That means then when you enter the learning space, you don't have the vocabulary to understand and explore and comprehend. That then grows then into your ability to read, because you're reading things that don't make sense to you. And that then infiltrates all of your curriculum access. You know, when people are talking about multiplication tables and photosynthesis, whatever it might be, I'm throwing a few words in there, but you don't have the level of vocabulary in order to process that and comprehend, and so that begins a gap, which then grows over time. That's the same for all children, not just children in Worcestershire, but that's something we're heavily focusing on. And in the second part of the report, I will talk to you about Best Start in Life, which is a national agenda we're heavily involved in. GCSE outcomes then, we're again, some positives there, around 9 to 4 grades, holding steady, but 9 to 5 grades remain a challenge for us and something we're heavily focusing on. One of the challenges we find with GCSE outcomes is only 3 of the schools that do GCSEs are maintained schools. So we're working hard to reach all the others which are academies. We have you know, a lot of jurisdiction and a lot of input with our maintained schools. Academies can choose where they get their school improvement from. And so that's, you know, one of the barriers we're overcoming and working hard with. You'll see then, if I turn to children looked after, we're closing the gap in several key areas. So you'll see around phonics, GCSE, English and Maths, Attainment 8, etc., all very positive, and we're seeing a significant improvement in our exclusions for children looked after. If I could just draw members' attention to missing Progress 8 scores this year. This is a model that is used across all local authorities, whereby children's measurement at Key Stage 2 is then compared to their measurement at GCSE and tracked to see that children are making effective progress. There's no GCSE marker, progress marker this year, because those children weren't in school in Key Stage 2. They were within the COVID time of non-testing. So in terms of Ofsted outcomes, and we'll look at that in a little bit more depth in a minute, our statistics show the vast majority of children within Worcestershire are in good or outstanding schools, effective schools, but what we're not seeing is that translate into the data at Key Stage 2, particularly for disadvantaged children. And that's a gap that we're trying to close right from the beginning in those early years all the way through to GCSE. I'll pause there in case anybody has any questions so far.
I'm sure we will. Thank you very much. But I think what you've done there is added some context that we were looking for, Jane. So thank you, particularly in relation to disadvantaged young people in terms of school readiness and how that has an ongoing impact throughout the life of that child and their education. So thank you for that. I'm going to go straight to questions from the panel. Is that all right, Cabinet members, or did you urgently want to come in with anything at this point, particularly Stephen Foster? No? Okay. So let's go straight to questions on this area. Can I kick off, is that all right, on a general question around who... The report states our statistical neighbours, and I'm not entirely sure who that is, so it would help if we know who we are being compared to. Thanks, Jane.
I have got that, sorry, and I've failed to print it off. Sarah's just pulling it up.
I sent the list over to Jane last night, so this might be a question.
And I looked at it.
Warwickshire is one. I can start to... Do you want to just take another question and I'll find the list?
Yeah. So,
I've got the list
Matt, I'll go to you first, then Anthony, I think you have something, then Mel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for that, Jane. I mean, you've kind of answered some of the questions, because obviously looking at the stats and all the tables, when we just look at them, you go, that doesn't look very good. Nearly all of them are below. Often what it looks like is we're kind of fairly static ourselves. It's just everyone else seems to be, particularly, nationals going up, and some of our statistical neighbours are going up. So it's almost like, what is the problem that we're facing? So it's kind of like, it was very much a message just why are we in this position? Obviously, you've kind of answered some of that it is a big focus on disadvantaged pupils. And just kind of thinking about that myself, it's like, it seems to be that if the problem stems from, it seems to be from what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, because we've got this cohort of disadvantaged pupils that arrive at school that are really well behind, and basically they spend the rest of their school life staying well behind, we're not able to catch up. Prevention, intervention at a very early stage seems to be the obvious thing, but actually probably the intervention that we're talking about is not so much to do with education, it's public health, it's those kind of people that are going into those houses and those visiting those people. So how can we kind of fix that, and who's responsible for doing that? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll touch on a number of things there, if that's okay. One of the things I think is important in our context in Worcestershire compared to nationally is our shape and size of the schools that we have. So we have over 65 schools in Worcestershire that have cohorts smaller than 100. Our smallest school in Worcestershire currently has 19 children on roll. When you look at those rural schools that really have significant rural pockets of deprivation, and you're dealing with very small numbers, that becomes a capacity issue for those schools. So that's one thing we're trying to do, is support them. You know, in a school of 36, you will have 2 teachers and a head who may not have the breadth of experience needed to support really high quality education with disadvantage. So there's a big push from the school improvement team on those children and those schools, and we're working closely with the Diocese of Worcester because many of them are Church of England schools. So that's one aspect. It absolutely is all of our responsibility for our children in Worcestershire, but we're working very closely more recently with some national partners. So we're working with the Education Endowment Foundation, which is a research group that funds work to develop education outcomes with local authorities and schools. We've been partnered with a research school, and we're just coming now to the end of a 2-year project on that, which looks specifically at our white British boys and our reading provision. 60 schools have been part of that, and they were handpicked for a variety of reasons: outcomes, capacity, demographic. And we're looking very closely now at region changes, so our districts. Where are our hotspots for disadvantage district-wise? There are certainly areas in Worcestershire that is managing really strong outcomes for disadvantaged children, and other areas where it's not the case. You mentioned about children coming in very low and then, you know, we struggle to catch up. DFE launched something called Best Start in Life in October. And that is a national and local project deemed to raise standards from the very beginning. All local authorities have been given a target for all children and a target for disadvantaged. Ours is roughly 9% ahead of where we currently are, so our disadvantaged target will be 55% by 2028, and our all target is 75% by 2028. Public health are in receipt of the funding for that, so that family hubs, settings, childminders, etc., who play a key role in that early development, are getting in at the start, and then that flows then into our nurseries and our early years settings. School improvement has been given a proportion of the funding attached to that, because although it is a public health project, it is measured by outcomes for GLD, for good levels of development. So we're working really closely with public health. And the other strategic thing we've done is the early years sufficiency team that look at over 800 of our settings, childminders, nurseries, have come under my leadership. So they're now in my portfolio so that we can make sure we're catching children much sooner, much earlier. So there's this lovely triangulation emerging of public health priorities, early years focus into school improvement, which we are positive will make a difference to children. I'll pause there.
Thank you. That was an extremely comprehensive response. I'm hoping that it answered your questions, Matt. I think what we're seeing the direction of travel from government is early intervention, it's multi-agency, it's public health, and ICB sort of stepping up and taking a role as well, isn't it? Which is all positive, but very early days. So, Sarah, you want to come in?
Yeah, just finally on the end of that, Health and Wellbeing Board, I think their next meeting is looking at the best start strategy, so there'll be some the detail there, but obviously we will be looking out to our GLD outcomes this year to see if we've made any shift with that. I also have the list now of the, do you want the list of stat neighbours for education? So they are Bedfordshire. I can send this over to, I'll read them out, but I can send them over for the minutes. Bedfordshire, Cheshire, including East and West Cheshire, East Riding of Yorkshire, Gloucestershire, Leicestershire, Northamptonshire, Shropshire, Staffordshire, Warwickshire and West Sussex.
That's quite a diverse group, isn't it, in terms of geography and demographic and everything, actually. So that's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, so that's good to know that Health and Wellbeing Board will be looking at the Best Start in Life initiative, yeah. So there's some crossover there with us. So one of my recommendations was going to be that we in the next annual report, pull together some impact data on Best Start in Life and on the other national initiatives that Jane mentioned, if that's okay with everybody as a group. Okay, thank you. Next question, Anthony?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. And thank you for the report. My initial question, you've answered some of the points of it. So I'd like to ask another question, basically. You mentioned the lowest performing group are white males. And then you talk about disadvantage being a problem with stage 2. Now, does that disadvantage relate to their home backgrounds? Is that where the disadvantage comes from? So, okay, you have to manage that. My question is then, moving on, you talk about going to GCE level. At what stage does disadvantage become lack of aspiration in white males? I mean, is there a point where, you know, they don't see futures, that there's nothing for them? Is there a relationship with this? And really, what's the fix?
Wow, there's some kind of thesis probably being written on that as we speak. But that's quite a lengthy question there, Anthony, but I'm sure Jane will have a crack at giving a response.
Thank you, I will do my best. So we see aspirations and low aspirations kicking in quite early. Actually, it doesn't wait to GCSE level. So children entering school will often come from fourth generation non-working families. So in some areas of Worcestershire. So then the impetus and the understanding of aspiration can be very limited. So that sits within schools' curriculum. How can they expose children to those opportunities that make them ambitious and have aspirations? Because if they're not experiencing that at home or in their own community, where does that come from? So it's absolutely incumbent on the school to build that into the child's experiences and to support families through things like Family Hub, parent workshops, etc. Many schools that serve large proportions of children from challenging backgrounds will have a family support worker, a nurture liaison officer. And in the latest Ofsted framework, careers, aspirations and education guidance has to be a very large part of secondary education so that children, again, are exposed to the world of work and what the opportunities are out there. We see this coming term a heavy focus from Ofsted in terms of children's work experience. You know, at one point I think children, it was just a week you went and had. Now it has to be meaningful and purposeful and has to be linked to local industry that can support children's aspirations.
Thanks. Okay,
Thank
Anthony.
you. Question from that. I mean, is there any evidence that this is bringing results?
Not yet. I would say we're at the end of a 2-year project and it is a specific focus for us. Ofsted's change in the way they look at careers, aspirations and education guidance has changed since January, so we're in the very early stages of it. I think what we've got is an anecdotal experience where schools that serve high levels of deprivation can report the proportion of children that are going on to further education, higher education, etc. But it's early days in the change of focus for Ofsted to see the impact yet.
One more point on that. Obviously, you need support from industry in regards to getting kids out there to understand what work's about. I mean, work experience is one thing. I mean, I think that was, what was it, 1980s, was it, or something? I don't know what the situation is now. I mean, but how easy is it to get teenagers into these situations where they can experience work and get to understand the reality of what life is?
I think it remains a challenge for it to be meaningful and purposeful. I think, you know, people offer placements. Schools often find that difficult. But there's a new measure for that called Gatsby benchmarking, which will significantly tighten the expectations on schools and on industry to work together. So I think there's a promising pathway forward rather than it being that experience of, oh gosh, we can't find anywhere to put you, so we'll just put you here of no interest. It does have to be linked now to their aspirations and future pathways much more clearly, and they are measured on that now.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Actually, coincidentally, it used to be one of my former jobs was managing the whole of the work experience offer for young people in year 10, mainly, year 10 and 11, usually 10, across the whole of North Worcestershire. And it did literally, it was either your mum knew someone and you went with them, or you went to work with your parents or whoever, or you stayed in the school and you did some work experience in the school. And I think these new guidelines will help it become a more meaningful and connected experience for young people, I hope anyway, but we look forward to see that. Mel, you've got a question, and then is it on the improvement aspect of the paper? Because we've only just had the first section, haven't we, at the moment? Was it?
I think you've covered most of the areas which I was going to go into anyway. I just want to go touch base on what you already said, which you mentioned about best start in life. I just want to know how you are, or have you achieved the 9% in your learning sort of guidance? Can you explain that further, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, as I said, Public Health have given us a grant to support our work. So what we've done is we've looked at patterns of entry and exit for early years. And we've split schools into a number of groups. So we have a 3-tier approach. One is universal, where whatever setting you are, whatever school you are, you're going to have some input. And that will be specifically around leaders holding people to account. How do you hold your early years people to account for the quality outcomes for those children? Then there is a targeted intervention, and that's aimed at people at schools that were more than 5% below national outcomes. So all the time we're trying to close that gap. And then there is a bespoke group, which is for schools that were more than 10% below. And they're getting on the ground coaching, support, intensive monitoring. So those are 3 tiers at the moment. We've got a county-wide summit coming up in June, which has national speakers specific to areas of disadvantage and how to raise outcomes, and we're tracking that really carefully. We've then mirrored that same project with our settings and our nurseries so that we're catching both ends.
Great, thank you. Okay, Mel? Just briefly, yeah.
And how is this quality, the quality assurance been checked with this?
So we've appointed a lead from another local authority who is an early years disadvantage specialist. He's tracking outcomes, I'm monitoring the quality assurance, and then there will be the data outcomes in the summer.
Great, thanks. That's quite a robust approach, I would say. Justin, I think you briefly want to come in on that point, yeah?
Yeah, it was just in terms of the improvement bit, just a couple of observations. The first, in terms of you highlighted about rural schools, and I think there is an issue about rural schools with low numbers who are often under pressure to take children with more complex needs. And I think that's an area that, as a local authority, that we need to look at, because that does create those additional pressures that you've highlighted. The second point is, so the new Families First model has just gone live, which I've talked about before, which is around team around the family with dedicated workers working with disadvantaged families. And it occurs to me that there's probably scope in there. So there are a range of workers available, so from mental health, we've even potentially well, there's substance misuse, etc. But having a dedicated education worker as part of that model seems to me would be a sensible addition. You're nodding, so I think it's probably already, so that I think there's something we can definitely do there, which can be part of the solution. And interestingly, I've also been working with Emma Brittay and the AD to look at having a neurodiversity worker as well, because some of those issues will stem from that. So I think there's potential there for families first to be part of this overall model of improvement. And then the last bit is just around, again, it's something I think for further development, but I think there is the key to working with these children in schools. It comes down to a very simple principle of you assess their needs, you plan, and then you intervene. And I think there's a lack of consistency across schools in terms of how that's done. So whether that's actually in terms of education attainment with disadvantaged children, to send children, and I'll say about the book I wrote in terms of supporting bereaved children, but getting consistent assessment, planning and intervention delivery across schools so that we are properly understanding the underlying causes of their difficulties. It's definitely a piece of work. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think that principle is a part of the solution as well.
Yeah, I mean, if I know Jane as well as I think I do, if there are any dots to be joined, she'll be joining them in terms of new government direction and policy and our opportunities. And I think you're right in what you say. It's around those trusted relationships of professionals working with that child and young person, and the pathways that have to have the snakes and the ladders, because not everybody moves forward all of the time. We have to build in the capacity for them to go backwards a little bit and then support. So I'm liking what you said, Justin, and I'm sure Jane is as well. Do you have a quick response before I move to... Yeah, Sarah?
I'll come in with the response in terms of putting the policy context together. So, and this is a paper about attainment, but the policy direction with if you put Every Child Achieving and Thriving, the current policy paper, which absolutely refers to Best Start strategy and the importance of that, families first, and the importance of that. There's a number of models where you can see that we're joining up the alignment here, that we are seeking to join those things up as much as possible. The new inspection framework by Ofsted really focuses down on, particularly now Jane will often speak about the new inspection framework for any first or primary school starts at the start of the inspection in early years, which is quite new for some of our schools in really looking into the quality within the early years setting. And then, of course, the SEND reforms also are all adding a kind of foundation to really focusing on understanding children. And as you say, Councillor Bowen, understanding that child, their needs in school, but their experiences at home, and then planning particularly for that. And then when we look across to the work that we've been doing with the Education Endowment Foundation, the University of Worcester, for a couple of years now, the emphasis is in developing leaders to be able to take that approach and lead it, because that's what's so necessary. And that then links back to, for our Worcestershire context, school leaders, including governors, having aspiration for children, because that can be a challenge. And in our role in challenging schools with low attainment, it has to be a challenge to governors that this is not the children or the family's fault, and they will, this is their lives, and sadly sometimes you do get that feedback in school leadership, that this is the way it is in this school and always has been. Well, no, it doesn't have to be at all. We are here to change that. So cultural leadership, along with some alignments of different ways of working, should really improve things.
Good to know, thanks. I know we've got the trauma-informed specialists in 74% of schools, I think, as well, which is picking up on one of Justin's points about adverse childhood experiences and how we deal with them. So hopefully that will be up to 100%. But Dan, you haven't asked a question yet, and I'm conscious of time, but have you got one on the improvement aspect before we ask Jane to go on to the next part of the paper?
Sorry, I know this is going to be a really difficult question to answer, so I apologise now, but I'm just kind of, as someone who's a Key Stage 5 specialist, it's one of those where obviously there's some numbers in here that are kind of a little bit, not disappointing, but expected, if I'm absolutely honest. I'm also very conscious, again, as someone who's worked in Worcestershire sixth form colleges, that the number of white British boys making it to sixth form is also incredibly low as well. The relationship between them making it there and these overall outcomes, of course, is going to be really difficult to kind of measure. But kind of what's going through my head at the moment is that 20 odd years ago, we had systems in place that I think have actually now disappeared slightly, where actually we had young people from more rural areas where they were getting things like free bus passes and they were able to get to sixth form colleges, they were able to access facilities. I do wonder the degree to which now they are not able to access those facilities, and whether actually that aspiration has narrowed because the availability of access has started to reduce. And especially for 16 to 19-year-olds where they need to get somewhere, especially to where there's going to be a cost associated with it. I'm going to throw my own party under the bus here and mention the educational maintenance allowance, which I know full well definitely had a massive impact on this as well. I'm just finding myself thinking, we've got quite a fragmented A-level provision across the county. Is this having an impact in terms of being able to access that, and then therefore your aspirations are reduced by the fact that you just can't get there? And especially in Pershore, I just feel like that is possibly something that I'm seeing with our young people, especially young males, where actually you start to become a burden on your family because they've got to start driving you around, but they've got to get to work. Are we looking at that? Are we seeing if that is actually a problem, or have I just made that up and created it in my own head?
No, thanks. So is there a correlation between access and aspiration, really, I suppose, in our young people? Sarah?
I couldn't say that that's something that we have examined and could make that correlation. It is absolutely a feature of Key Stage 5 in Worcestershire that we've probably covered at this panel in previous years of this report. Your description of a fragmented sixth form provision, it is a variable sixth form provision. We've got some very small sixth forms, and we also have but we have a Worcester sixth form college, which is very large, and a sixth form provision with exceptionally good outcomes. So there is it's a feature of Worcestershire that there is quite a variation in the size and therefore quality outcomes of sixth form provision. We haven't examined to make a correlation around access, but I think you could link absolutely aspiration and therefore access together in any rural local area. And perhaps the next paper in terms of home-to-school transport and the new bus strategies may shine some light on what might be coming in the future. I think the other, just going back to the conversation we had earlier about early careers, that is intended again to really enable our children and young people at an earlier age. So it's from year 7, the expectation will be that children have access to a number of hours of early careers access, and that's employers coming into school, children getting the opportunity to go out in a whole range of ways, something that we as a council would want to look at in terms of being an employer, how we can look at those opportunities for children and young people. That is all intended again to show opportunity to children and young people and then help them to plan their curriculum pathway, which again may assist in terms of a balance of education for our young people.
Okay, Dan. So yes, acknowledgement that there is a connection there, and maybe we'll hear more from Stuart around homeschool transport, BSIP, etc., in terms of how to address that. Okay. I'd like to move us on to the next part of the paper, if that's all right, Jane. So if you could take us through the school improvement services element, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you. So the school improvement team comprises of 10 advisors. There's a selection of subject specialists in there who offer the operational on-the-ground work with our teaching staff, and then there are a range of school improvement advisors who each have a caseload of the 95 schools in Worcestershire, 95 at the time of publication and outcomes. It is 91 currently. They all have an allocation of schools where they work in those 3 tiers of either light touch, stable or intense support. I'm pleased to say sometimes there is need to pick schools up mid-year, so we're constantly refreshing and reviewing that. Where we see challenges, where we see potential underperformance, we recalibrate and change the level of intensity for that school. We're involved in a number of statutory elements with our maintained schools, so we attend all Ofsted feedback, head teacher performance management, requires an external advisor, often ourselves, and we're part of every head teacher appointment in Worcestershire, in addition to the caseload. We also oversee statutory assessment, as Sarah said today, marks the start of the Key Stage 2 assessment window, GCSE and A levels, and our team, as we speak, are out and about doing unannounced monitoring checks to ensure all schools that are in the cycle this year are delivering the tests in the appropriate way. If I go on to the Ofsted then, significant changes in the inspection. We've seen quite an upheaval here. So following the Ruth Perry inquiry, Ofsted did the big listen and went back and talked to all stakeholders around what should change about Ofsted. And in that time, they paused giving schools an overall judgment. So whereas our previous KPI was around the proportion of schools good and outstanding, there was a time last academic year where schools were not awarded a whole judgment. Then in September, we saw the launch of the new framework. Only pilot schools were inspected up to December. So for Worcestershire, we didn't have any inspections until this January. So you'll see from the report, we find we've in a moment where we've got 3 measures: schools that had been inspected on the old framework, schools that have been inspected on the paused framework, and now this framework. So if I just share with you very briefly, Sarah will no doubt nudge me because this is my passion at the moment around inspection. She'll tell me to stop. Ofsted have come up with a range of new areas they want to assess and grade. They are safeguarding, schools are either met or not met, and then they are inclusion, curriculum and teaching, achievement, which is all about outcomes, attendance and behaviour, personal development, well-being, leadership and governance. And if you have an early years, they will grade that separately, and if you have a sixth form, they will grade that separately. They've got rid of all of the previous benchmarks and descriptions of the grades, so now schools can be in any one of those areas: exceptional, strong, expected, needs attention or urgent improvement. There is no correlation between the old benchmark of good and the expected standard. Ofsted are very clear that if schools are at the expected standard, they have done a really, really good job by their children. It is very hard to manage an expected grade across the board. So we're working heavily with schools to understand the new expectations, as Sarah alluded to earlier. Inspections now on day 1 of all first and primary schools focus on early years and Key Stage 1. They focus on what Ofsted call the foundational knowledge. Are schools building the foundations of knowledge that will get those children through to better outcomes and life chances? So the focus on foundational knowledge is early reading, early writing through transcription and composition, and early maths through fluency and number recognition. So really key, are we building the right things in early years so that children have the platform to go on to achieve more? It's an interesting time for schools to understand, interesting time for governors and community to understand the changes and the shift and the expectations that are now much higher. But that's right, we should have higher expectations for our children. Within the framework, you might be interested to know that there are always 6 children who are picked as a focus, something called case sampling. Those 6 children are picked by Ofsted with discussion with the school, and they must include children from a disadvantaged background, they must include children with SEN, they must include those who are looked after. So essentially the 6 children that are picked in whatever setting you're in will come under the umbrella of vulnerable learners. And Ofsted want to drill down to see if the school is doing a good job by those most vulnerable in their care. I will just share with you that Ofsted is operating a pilot at the moment called OPI, Ofsted Peer Inspectors, where they're recruiting members from the sector to inspect the sector. They want practicing professionals to be part of the inspection process. Worcestershire has been picked as the first LA in West Midlands to be part of that pilot. We have 14 inspectors who qualified last week and are out starting their inspection journey in the next 2 weeks. That's a really positive move for us. We've particularly chosen heads of small schools, multi-academy trust representation, so that we can be sure there's a good spread across Worcestershire of practising inspectors who can help schools to help children achieve more.
Thanks, Jane. I'm really pleased that the changes have been embraced and taken on, in a positive frame, and you're right, it's a good opportunity for us. Questions then from the panel? Who would like to go first? No? Matt?
Go on then.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and
interesting.
thanks for that. Yeah, it's all very interesting. I mean, I think you answered, again, some of my questions. But I suppose you've got your team of advisors, you've got all these schools, and you did mention earlier about the difficulty in rural schools. So obviously we know the county council's under, financial stress, to put it that way, and obviously there's a risk of losing advisors rather than gaining more. But I suppose it's how effective do you think your team is compared to other councils? Because I assume other councils all have a similar kind of team. Is there anything we can learn from them in terms of, if you go back to our data about our data not being so good at attainment, is there something we can learn from those others, or is it, like you said, just a case of we've just got so many small disparate schools, it makes it much harder for us compared to maybe some others? So if that's a question in there, if that makes sense. Thank you.
It does, thank you. We try wherever possible to be a self-sustaining team, so we have a traded income target and we generate a significant amount of money around that, and that helps the school improvement team to wash its own face. A lot of that traded comes from our work with academies. They're very impressed by what maintained schools get and then buy in for our services, and they're very carefully designed services. So again, the CPD, continuing professional development, available to all, but then there's targeted and bespoke work within that. I think one of the strengths of the Best Start in Life is that we can use some of that funding to grow the strength of our team. We're looking at recruiting a disadvantaged champion so that somebody with really specialist knowledge can join us. And talking to other local authorities, I think it's a mixed picture, to be fair. Lots of local authorities no longer have a school improvement team, and they are reporting to me that they're really struggling to know their schools and target that support. Other local authorities report a similar model to ours. I'm part of a West Midlands Leads group, and we meet once a month and we share best practice across that. We do lots of cross-working, sharing of resources. And again, we do the same for early years. So it's about drilling down to, in those meetings, what are you doing well? Can I come and have a look at that? What can I learn? A number of our advisors work in multiple local authorities. So we're across Leicestershire, Birmingham and Warwickshire at the moment. They work part-time for us and part-time for them. So lots of cross-pollination there. And we trade at the moment for the DFE in our English advisor work. They've commissioned us to roll out secondary programmes across the West Midlands. So we're giving and receiving lots of expertise, and all the time it's my job to filter that down to know what's the best thing that will make the biggest difference.
Great, thanks Jane. So
Can I-
recommendation for me then is that we keep hold of our school improvement team, or at least do our very best to, because it seems like there's such a high level of expertise there and learning going on from in the sector, you know, outside our own boundaries, that cabinet members, if we can do that in times of financial strain, that would be very helpful. But as an income generation service, you know, it sounds like you're doing a pretty good job to self-fund almost, but thank you. Sorry, Matt, did I jump in?
Well, you kind of made the point I was going to make, so that's clearly great minds and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's the idea that actually it washes its face, and then you think, oh, well, we need money. There's potential there. We can then use it to, if other places particularly are closing it down. I know Dan says about archaeology, the same idea that we could actually then be, people come to us. You know, and there's going to be more academies, not less. So yeah, I think it's something maybe that we need to think a bit entrepreneurially, if that's the right word. Thank you. Cheers.
No, thank you. Sorry, I stole your thunder a bit there. Okay, Anthony, do you want to come in now?
Please, yeah, thank you. With regards to the implementation of new standard systems measured that we're putting into the schools, I'd like to understand from the teaching point of view, how much input do they have into these things? Or is it a question of they're not asked what they want, they are told what to do? And also, you know, I mean, can you measure the school by its staff turnover? Is that something that gives you an indication of things aren't right?
Okay, two-pronged question there. Jane?
That's okay. I'll answer the second part because that's really quick and easy. Absolutely. One of the things we look at in our risk assessment is the turnover of staff. And in an Ofsted inspection, they look at staff attendance because our staff are a good model for attendance. And how is that then impacting? Because if your staff aren't present, children's education becomes disrupted. If you have a lot of staff changeover, how are you maintaining consistency? So that's absolutely something we look at. And that often sits in the culture of the school and the expectations. To go back to your first question, how much is dictated and how much is choice? It's a blend of both. If you are doing a really good job by your children and you've got effective leadership and governance that is identifying where the needs are and meeting that needs on a consistent basis, then you've got a huge amount of autonomy. If, on the other hand, you are consistently not doing that, and we can see that leaders and staff would benefit from some additional support, have a duty of care to the children in Worcestershire to do what's right and intervene. And that comes under our DFE guidance around schools needing support. So there's a DFE guidance that's very specific about our role in school improvement and when we can enact our powers in terms of intervention. But we rarely need to get to that point because our offer is so broad and tailors to the needs of the children in Worcestershire and the schools in Worcestershire that very often, and you'll see our percentage of children of schools that need intensive support has reduced significantly. We're getting there soon enough to stem the flow of underperformance. There's always something on offer for all schools to choose, but there are some schools in receipt of intensive support where there is less autonomy because the children aren't getting what they need.
Great, understood.
Thank you. Can I move?
Quickly, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to my school days, which is a hell of a long time ago now, but I recall really vividly the fact that the thing that got me through difficult times was teachers. There were teachers that latched onto you, they saw what you were struggling with, and they helped you. I mean, my point is, what drives success? Is it systems or is it teachers?
It's culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast is a very famous saying. It's about everybody understanding our role, our responsibility and our drive, and that includes children, parents, community, and most importantly, the leaders driving that forward. So I think, you're absolutely right. An inspirational teacher makes all the difference. And it's about being in the job for the right reasons. I want these children to go on to have the best chances in life, the best outcomes that can be afforded to them so that they have ultimate choice and in adult life. So I think the difference is around knowing our children, where are they, what do they need, what's the best way of getting them there, and leaders checking that that's the right pathway for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good point, well made, Anthony, because I think we can all remember someone in our past, whether that's a teacher or somebody from a youth club or a football club or whatever it might be, that's had that positive impact on us, which is why this multi-agency approach seems to be the right one, really. It can't all lay at the school doors, but certainly it's helpful too. Okay, I'm conscious of time. Mel, I think you've got a question on this part. Yep.
I'm just touching base on CPD. What training would you be providing for the staff, obviously, to improve what you're doing?
So CPD, our general offer is open to all schools maintained or academies. It's a really comprehensive package which looks at raising outcomes for disadvantage, writing, curriculum design. It's a huge offer. Once you get to needing more intense support, instead of coming out to a training course, we go to you, and we're in school, and it's not a one-hit wonder. We do the training, then we work alongside the teachers, we coach them, and then myself and one of the team will go in and we'll do a full learning and teaching review to see the impact of that and support the school with both HR, if needed, and further coaching to make sure those staff are held to account.
Okay, great, thanks. Any other questions? Or
Anthony.
Anthony again, yeah.
Thank you. One more question regarding page 15, the full inspections breakdown. I mean, obviously we've seen in the first part of the paper that things are down percentage-wise as an average across the county in regards to the rest of the country. But reading the inspection report on all aspects of it, it's really received 39 outstanding, 9 required improvement, 21 out of 25 receive outstanding, 4 required improvement. So how are we getting such good outcome as regards Ofsted, but the actual data says that we're below average?
That's a question that keeps me awake. No, that's fine. You're absolutely right. Ofsted, the main quality assurance statutory marker is telling us that schools in Worcestershire are performing well, are doing better than lots of their counterparts. We have a vast majority of our children are in good and better provision. There is always a lag with data, and we've seen an uplift in our Ofsted outcomes steadily over the last 3 years, and data is always the last thing to lift in a school improvement journey because you have to expose the children to the quality of education for a long time before you get to a better outcome. However, I think that's about how forensic we are as a school improvement team. So although Ofsted have said this, what are your areas for improvement? And is that the same for all children? Generally you're seeing that as good provision, but let's drill down to, in this small school, you've only got 5 children who are disadvantaged. What does that mean for them specifically? And I think Ofsted will support us with that now. There is an inclusion judgment and an achievement judgment and a curriculum and teaching judgment. I think they're looking more forensically, and that will cause us to again look forensically.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Dan, come on then.
Just a very quick one on the exactly same thing. Throwing Ofsted under the bus this time. Is it not potentially, and I don't know how much research has been done into this, but I know there was enough done around 2010 to do this, if we've not got a compliance versus outcome issue, i.e. basically, because behaviours tend to be quite good in schools, you can start to argue that you're a good school rather than a requires improvement. And actually what might be happening is we've got a situation here where actually, because our young people are generally quite well behaved, that the lower outcomes might necessarily be brushed over slightly. Just chucking it out there.
I think in the new framework that isn't the case. It is so much more detailed and so much more specific than it ever has been. The case sampling, for example, means that compliant, well-behaved children who are underachieving can't escape the focus. And I think it's interesting that in the inspection they've separated inclusion, which is around systems and processes, and then curriculum and teaching, the impact that has on children. I'm one of the 14 Ofsted inspectors that are part of the pilot, so I've just finished my training. It is really the most rigorous framework I've seen in 30 years of education. I'm excited for how detailed it is.
I'm seeing hands, but I want to leave it on an excited note and sort of draw things to a close. But go on, Dan, just
I was going to
quickly.
say, so maybe the last framework, maybe that possibly was the issue. Is that what we're suggesting? Possibly that could have been an impact?
I don't think I could have an opinion on that.
No. Let's leave it there. But I think that's come to a good natural conclusion, actually, and it's been a really interesting discussion, and thank you so much for taking us through things in such great detail, Jane. Stephen, I've done this backwards. I would normally have come to you sort of before now for any comments, but is there anything that you'd like to add before we try and pull any recommendations together? No, thank you, and thanks for your attendance today. Thank you also, Justin, because I wasn't sure if you were coming or not, but it's good to have you here. Always here, yes. Thank you. Okay, so did we capture recommendations there, Sam, as we went through?
I captured a request for the statistical neighbours, and Sarah's already sent them, so I'll share that with members. And then you suggested including details on the impact of early intervention in the next annual update.
Yep. So I think that was in relation to Best Start in Life, and obviously I think we'll be seeing the new Ofsted framework reflected in the next report as well. So just kind of naturally leading on, don't they? But yes, thank you. Anyone think we've missed anything or would like to add a recommendation? Nope. Brilliant. Okay, so people that were here for that don't have to stay if you don't want to. But thank you very much for your contribution today. It's nice to see you. Okay. So we're going to have just Stuart coming to the front row, I think, to the A team. But if you don't mind, I'll just carry on with the introductions to move us forward. So we're moving on to agenda item 6. Oh, we lost Mel. I'll carry on, I think, if that's okay. Yeah. Agenda item 6, home to school transport. So we're about to be updated on the home to school transport policy and bus service improvement plan, including information on pupil numbers and other relevant data, and also details on the 7-card scheme. I knew I'd struggle with that one, including the recent changes in pricing that have been approved by officers for implementation at the start of the new academic year in September. In attendance for this item, we have Councillor Nick Price, Interim Cabinet Member for Highways, Stuart Payton, Head of Transport Operations, Adam Johnston, Director of Children's Services, and Sarah Wilkins, Assistant Director of Education Early Years Inclusion and Education Place Planning. I said that best that time. And also we have Cabinet Members Stephen Foster and Justin Bowen here along too. So Stuart, I believe you'll be taking us through the report. Everybody's had a chance to read it and come up with some questions, so if you could pull out all of the bits that you think are most relevant for us today, that would be great. Thank you.
No problem, Chair. So the report just provides an overview of the Council's current position in terms of the number of pupils, etc. with transport, plus the sort of current financial picture of the cost and provision of that transport. It also highlights, as asked, sort of the policy, the discretionary and the statutory elements of our policy. It also looks at the homeschool, the 7-card, its current position, and obviously as outlined the sort of changes to that. So I'll just go through some of this in a bit more detail. Obviously it's in quite a bit of detail in the report. So we currently transport around 11,000 children per day. We've got an increase in demand for send. That is obviously a significant increase. If you look at the figures from 2018-19, it's about 1,600 circa, and we're up to over 3,000 in this current year. Mainstream demand has remained relatively steady. There was an increase during COVID, and that now comes in around 5,000 applications per year that we get from mainstream schools transport. Growth obviously has been driven, is particularly in the send area, it's been driven by complexity of need, growth in EHCPs, and a greater reliance on transport due to widening provision in outer county and independent schools.
Cost pressures are one of our main concerns. Total expenditure has increased from around 15 million in 2019, not 20, to around 36.8 million in this current, the end of that current last financial year. SEND now represents the majority of that cost, with over 26 million compared to mainstream's just over 10 million. So the budgetary position for 26-27 is we've got a budget of 48.3 million with a savings target of 4.5 million required. We use a transport review program to generate the majority of our savings, and this is to plan efficiency, remove costs, and to try and make sure that what we provide through our network is the most efficient and effective way to provide that transport. In 2025, the programme delivered £3.26 million in savings for the in-year transport. It also has an effect on this year of over 5.2 million. So you can see there's quite a considerable amount of savings that we've made through that programme. We have more reviews planned for this year. That will focus on a few key SEND schools and the provision of our pupil referral units. We will also be looking at the mainstream networks, so that's coaches in Bromsgrove and Redditch areas. The overview of the policy, as I said earlier, it covers our statutory duties and our discretionary areas. Particularly discretionary areas are post-16 transport and our vacancy scheme. The 7-card scheme, that is a multi-operator ticketing scheme that we provide for, particularly for pupils who are entitled under our post-16 policy, and also pupils who are not entitled to homeschool transport but could use the public transport network to move around the county. The costs are rising this year. Obviously, the cost of provision have been continuing to rise over the number of years, but the cost of the actual offer hasn't. But that has been agreed now as part of our move forward and to try and make the scheme more sustainable moving forward. There is a part here about the out-of-county transport. So our out-of-county transport is one of the areas we've seen significant growth over the number of years. And obviously that comes with a sort of obviously cost pressures, but it also comes with the fact that we're now transporting children quite significant distances, with the 53 miles being the largest distance. We currently transport someone as a one-way trip. So you can see that's quite a considerable distance. The report also covers the work we are doing as part of the bus service improvement plan and the funding we've got from central government to improve bus services around the county. That includes improving our demand responsive transport offer, which is now county-wide. Originally started in Bromsgrove and expanded last year into, the previous years into Malvern, last year into Wychavon, and now across the whole of the county. There are some small areas that still aren't covered, but we're doing that. We're looking at those as we mop up and take feedback from our passengers. We're also looking at our commercial network in partnership with our operators. We've got an enhanced partnership where we work with operators and other partners to look at initiatives such as ticketing, fares, congestion, and all elements really of provision of bus service transport, including access to education. So the University of Worcester and post-16 colleges are involved in that to look at their needs, their challenges, and how we can best meet that through the bus service improvement plan. We've extended frequencies and operation of services across the county, and we've got more work underway as we look at those services and how we can increase that. And some of that obviously is very beneficial for students, particularly post-16 students travelling to sixth form, as numbers had previously been raised. So the key messages really from the report are the demand for SEND transport continues. The growth and provision for in-county independent schools and out-county is definitely one of the more challenging areas we have. We'll continue to review that and move forward with our, performance review programs that we have. But obviously, it indicated that the numbers are going to continue to rise. There does not seem to be any slowing of that growth in our SEND transport. So that's still a demand that we have to manage. Obviously, the bus service improvement plan, we have funding now up till 2030, so we know that there's quite a lot of work to be done on that, but that is, to improve bus services across the county. It will benefit all of us in terms of education, in terms of employment, in terms of access to healthcare, etc. So that's one of our key areas that we're focusing on in terms of improve that in partnership with our commercial bus service operators. That's it for questions.
Pause for breath. Thank you, Stuart. And thanks for condensing the report into the key themes for us. That's really helpful. Councillor Price, I wonder if this is a good point to bring you in for any comments you might have.
Thank you, Chair. I think before we start with anything else, I think it's really important to remember that behind every number in this report is a child, a family, and often parents managing incredibly difficult daily routines. I think for many families, especially those with children with additional needs, home to school transport is not just a service. It is something that they depend on for stability, safety, and access to education. As Stuart said, every school day we transport around 11,000 children and young people across Worcestershire. We are seeing growing demand and increasing complexity, particularly around SEND transport. From my perspective as CMR for Highways and Transport, our focus is making sure these services remain safe, reliable, and sustainable for children and families who rely on them every day. We understand how important this is to families and our responsibility to support them with compassion while making sure the transport network remains sustainable for the future. And that's all I'll add at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for raising some really pertinent points there, especially around, sustainability and reliability that I think we would all say are important. Other Cabinet members, Councillor Foster, Councillor Bowen, anything from you before I move to the committee for questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Only to say that this panel is aware of our purchase of St Dunstan's, which will be turned into a sixth form for SEND, and the excessive costs of independent provision often out of county will be significantly reduced, as will the home to school transport, and Adam and I have discussed this previously. This could result in savings in excess of £10 million per annum. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. There is a clear link between sufficiency and costs in terms of homeschool transport, aren't there, which is really important to remember. And thank you for saying that that project has moved forward, because I'm not sure that we had confirmation of that. We obviously discussed it as a panel, and it was a recommendation from us that we did go ahead with the purchase. So I'm very pleased to hear that's happened. Okay, panel, questions please. Mel.
I need to point out straight away, 53 miles one way for one child, that's a lot. So by the time they actually reach school, they're tired. Hence, the reports are showing learning has been underachieved. I don't think that's a very good start for a child.
Do you want to come back on that, Stuart, at all? I noted in the report it said that it wasn't age related. This maximum 60 minutes travel, isn't it? I think in one direction. So, is there anything that you'd like to point out about attainment and school travelling?
Obviously, the guidelines for we take into account. We do try and reduce those numbers, but unfortunately, there are times when children are placed into whether that's particularly for their need or obviously at this point I wouldn't know what that particular placement is, but that is where they're attending school, and unfortunately that is an out-of-county establishment, and that's the sort of distance.
Adam, yeah.
It's one of those subject matters we have previously spoken about in a lot of detail, so I'm not proposing I do so now. It's Chair, you're right, it's intrinsically linked to education sufficiency. There's no two ways about it. So the reality is that we have a number of our children placed at some distance. That's not out of aspiration on our part, far from it. it's, as ever, a really, really fine balance, and you'll be aware that on an annual basis, certainly through Cabinet, we're reporting on education sufficiency. And that balance that I'm alluding to is that balance in terms of getting it right with regard to trying to create more sufficiency in county for our children. And I do believe there's genuine prioritisation and movement forward beyond previous discussions that we've had at Cabinet in that regard. You've just heard some of it from Councillor Foster there. But at the same time, I think it's really, really important, as ever, as is often the case in this world, there are competing demands, and that remains the case now. So the reform with regard to SEND, that again the Chair referred to, the Chair's pointing out various things which highlight these balance-based issues, is reform that are welcome, but simultaneously we're operating almost two systems from a SEND perspective, and it's really, really important to bear that in mind. So the Malvern Free School, for example, and the continuation of the Malvern Free School is something we could wax lyrical about, and officers who are here today were very, very keen proponents with the DFE in terms of securing that, and I'm pleased that we have. And the associated monies for the provision of one school, I don't know, pick a figure, 20 million, 30 million. We've not that long ago had discussions that almost double that with regard to certain education provision. But at the same time, those competing demands have not dissipated overnight. And if that sounds defensive, I don't mean it to be defensive. I just think it's really, to be honest, I think for Stuart's essentially charged with the responsibility of providing homeschool transport. He's certainly not the individual who's responsible for a child who's been placed 50 odd miles away.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's negative. I would say it's a reality check for all of us, really, to be aware of the nuances involved here. And we all appreciate that there are children, as Nick said, you know, at the heart of this. But yeah, competing pressures, I think, was the phrase I heard. Anthony, you, I think, have something around contracts. Yeah.
Yeah, I did, but one small question first before I ask that, and that's down to paragraph 5 on page 1, where it states that the greater use of high-cost transport, such as individual taxis, alongside rising parental expectations. Does expectations equal statutory duty?
We have a statutory duty to provide the most effective and best transport for that pupil, and to get them there in a manner that they are, able to learn. So we do try and obviously stick to a certain amount of the statutory duty, but with SEND there is a certain element that we have to obviously have consultations with parents, and we do as we change transport to ensure that the best needs of the child are met. There are a lot of children that have high levels of anxiety and emotional needs that we have to take into account, and we have to work with parents in cases to try and make sure that transport's appropriate for that child can get to school in ability to learn. And sometimes that comes at decisions where the best use is in individual transport. Now, we work with schools to try and, where we can, to work with the schools, work with the parents to get them on to shared transport. I'm trying to say this in the best way, but to work with them to alleviate any anxieties, any sort of areas that we do that, to try and get them, and that can be a lot of things like social stories. It can be a lot of meet and greet. We often send taxis to the parent's house before they start, so they can meet the driver, they can meet the passenger assistant, they can meet some of the other children, and work with them to get as many onto shared transport, because it is more effective for us. But that's not always the case, and sometimes that can take quite a substantial time. So whilst there is a statutory duty to provide the transport, the actual provision for each individual does change, particularly with SEND, because we have to take into account the individual's needs, and that is in collaboration often with the school and with the parents to make sure that we're providing transport, like I said, that is the most appropriate for that individual child.
Okay, thanks. Can I move to the main question? This next question purely comes out of a business point of view, because if I was given this in a business context. I'd really like to understand and get to know how you manage this. And I mean, it is really just a correlation of where we are. You say, obviously, 11,000 children a day. So that equates, if they go to school and coming back, that's 22,000 journeys a day. That's individual journeys, whether obviously they're on a coach together or they're in individual taxis. So that then correlates, if you've got 22 school days in a month average, 484,000 journeys that have to be rubber stamped every month with regards to they have been undertaken and we get charged for them. Now, you know, again, I move on to the fact you've got 197 contracts. So my question really is, how do we manage this? How and it sounds, I don't want to sound condescending, how do we control such an enormous amount of data? And really, you know, does every journey get checked that it's made? If a child is ill, who tells the county that that journey has not been carried out? And then how do you check that at the end of the month to make sure it hasn't appeared on the purchase ledger?
So some general questions about contract management and your capacity to deal with all of those pressures, I think, Stuart, but then also the specifics around individual children maybe not travelling and how do we know? Thanks.
Well, we obviously have a number of teams that deal with the management of the contracts. And it is becoming more challenging because we have a lot more contracts and a lot more individual contracts, etc. So we have monitoring officers who go out and will spot check. We spot check operators to ensure that they are A, doing what they're supposed to be doing, B, that they have all the necessary safeguarding, etc. checks, because all the staff that work for us are badged by us, so we do all the safeguarding, etc. All the training for the passenger assistance has to be managed. But we rely a lot on working with the schools in terms of the operation of the contracts. We rely a lot on some of the data around parental attendance, so the attendance data from the education system. So we use that. We have officers who check that to make sure that a lot of those pupils are still attending. But we do a lot mainly with the schools because we can't manage every single individual journey. Is quite difficult to do if that definitely happened. There is contractual elements within our contract around notice period. So if the operator's gone to undertake the journey in good faith and the parent has said they're ill on that day, they would still get paid for that journey. Long-term sickness absence is something we manage, and we often work with schools. We often work with, like I said, with the attendance data to correlate that with our, and we will go back if operators have overcharged or days that we haven't removed that payment out of their ongoing sort of contract payments. So we do a lot of management work with that in terms of managing all those significant contracts. It's more of an issue around individual transport. Obviously, where multiple students, it's unlikely that every student on the particular contract will be ill that day. So that's kind of where we focus our attention.
Okay, thanks. Just moving on from that quickly if I can. Obviously, the Mobisoft software dictates the journey. It gives you the best journey for that child. It works out the route. It's a route checker, if you like. What dictates the best taxi company to use for that journey? I mean, obviously, I've looked this up, and I'm not going to mention any names, but I mean, we have a company outside of Worcestershire, which, from what I can see, every month is invoicing £200,000, £150,000 a month. And I mean, it's risen from 2021 to 2025 from 14 employees to 18 employees. Now, I'm not trying to assume anything or imply anything here, but obviously, if they're coming from Birmingham to Worcestershire to carry out journeys for pupils, what's the agenda behind that? Are they the best company to do that, or are they just someone that we need because we've got such a demand for transport that we have to really factor in the fact, if we can just get somebody, that cures the problem. I think it may have been you. I think last January, February 2025, I think it was, where you did make a statement about the fact, that we are trying to get taxi companies to work with the council because we need taxi companies. So, in essence, that really puts us on the back foot, doesn't it? Because, we have to keep up with the demand. So, what favour does it give the taxi company over the fact, you know, that we are not doing the correct thing, we are just doing the thing that keeps up with the demand?
Okay, good question. So, excuse the pun, what is the driver behind the service provision? Is it the demand, or is it the needs of the children and young people? What's the sort of ultimate thing that you consider when awarding the contracts?
Obviously, we have to provide the transport. We've got a statutory duty. There's no sort of two ways of getting around that. What we try and do, obviously, with our framework, because we have an improved operator framework, so all of our operators come onto that framework. They have to provide information about their businesses, their insurances, you know, all of the standard sort of guides. We then train all of their staff. So the staff have to be badged by us, so the safe targeting checks, all the safeguard, all of the passenger assistant training, etc. ourselves. So we try and ensure that everybody on that framework is capable of doing what we're requiring. And like I said, we have monitoring officers, so we regularly spot check those vehicles. We work closely with district licensing, etc., to make sure that, you know, people are using the right staff, that the vehicles are the correct vehicles, and there's no issues around that. So we do a lot of work around that. We have increasing demand. Now, we've done a lot of work in terms of the increasing demand to work with operators, so not just operators within the county, but then obviously anybody on the sort of periphery of Worcestershire, to try and build that network up. Like you said, well, a particular operator, I don't know which operator you're referring to, but a lot of our operators have grown because they understand, you know, they've seen the growth in demand for send, and they continue to do that. Obviously, at points that growth has sort of outstrip the sort of ability for our local operators to sort of provide, so more have come in from outside of the county, but that now is slightly changing. A lot more of our sort of internal operators are sort of providing more drivers, providing more staff, so we've got quite considerable growth in that area. We are still seeing that growth. That will still continue, and we'll still manage that as we move forward. But the main drivers, you know, like I say, is demand, but it's also, we do have to take into account need, we do have to take into account the distances travelled, the locations they're travelling to, the geographical location that they're in the area, because we've got large areas of Worcestershire where we have poor provision of taxi operators. You know, we're quite a rural county, particularly if you sort of move further south and southwest. You know, we don't have many operators in Tenbury Wells and around that. So, you know, we do have to, unfortunately, pull in from sort of, you know, significant areas to try and meet that need. But the driver will always be that if we have a statutory duty to transport that child, then we have to arrange that transport.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. A complicated matrix then is the answer, but child need first. Matt.
Thank you, Chair. I've actually got 3 questions, so you can stop me and let someone else jump in if I'm going on too long. Firstly, just about the budget. So the forecast budget for the coming year was it 48.3 million with a target of 4.5, so bringing it down to about 44 million. So obviously the previous 2 years, yeah, so like the last year we had a budget of about 45, but you managed to get in about, you know, it was 38.6. So just, you know, wondering why next year's forecast is so much bigger. Is it purely down to the cost of fuel? So just a quick one around why you think your forecast is so big. Then it kind of looks like, well, we're going to have a massive forecast, then we can make all these savings. So it's like, well, why did you have such a big forecast in the first place? Not being cynical. Thank you.
Welcome to our panel, Stuart. Would you like to answer that?
The forecast obviously is prepared in terms of looking at the growth, the continued growth. Obviously, we were predicting to spend a lot more again this year, but that was based on growth where we'd previously been, what that growth could potentially generate. I think we always go with it is the worst case scenario of, you know, if we didn't make any savings, if the growth was continued at the level it is, then we'll hit those sort of numbers. This year, obviously, we've, you know, at the start of the year, we put in some additional resource within the planning and review team, you know, and we brought some of the reviews that we were going to do later, and we brought those forward to try and make sure that, you know, we've generated as much of that efficiency savings as we possibly can. That obviously has brought us in, you know, thankfully very under budget. We hope that we will do that again next year, but obviously at this point, you know, we're still working quite closely with the growth. You know, we've still got significant growth. How that pans out, whether that will be particularly expensive, and this is an area that, you know, we've always found it is quite challenging. you might get 20 pupils in. If those 20 pupils can all share transport, then the growth of the cost of that will be considerably lower than if all of those 20 pupils end up on individual transport with passenger assistance. So it's getting that balance and understanding how that's going to form. So we always go with the forecasting, sort of looking at those. We know also that there is challenges around fuel costs, and that that's we've seen. Obviously, we've all seen a significant rise in the cost of fuel over the last few months. That will have an effect next year, in everything that we go out to procure, obviously. So it's managing that sort of levels of growth, the external factors that we can't control. But then, the one thing we can do is look at how we review transport, what we can drive in terms of efficiencies, how we can integrate more, mainstream schools into potentially public transport, etc. So look at all those factors that are within our control and how we manage that in things. So that's why.
Thank you. Number 2. Right. This partly follows on from Anthony's question about contracts. So it's quite a specific one, so don't really go into details because it is a specific Worcester Wheels charity in Worcester. I think they've lost out on the contract. So obviously you're looking at contracts, you're probably looking from a, Worcestershire wide, how can we save a bit of money? This contract might save more, but obviously what you're losing perhaps if you're a long-standing charity like Worcester Wheels, their contact knowledge of the pupils, certainly a lot of, autistic pupils like to see the same driver every time, and then suddenly there's complete change accompanying how they manage things. So how do you weigh up those things? Thank you.
It's always a difficult one, and we do, like I said, when we do start the consultation processes or when we change school transport under our reviews, there is a consultation process. So we send information out to parents, telling them what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and they're allowed to, they can send their feedback in for that. We also, when we're doing our sort of main special schools, because resource-wise we can do parental sessions, so we do a parental session that's a daytime, a parental session at an evening time, and we work with the schools as well to sort of look at those children where, what potentially would be the impact of changing transport. Sometimes we don't change transport if the need of the people is identified as that would be too detrimental to them or detrimental to their education. Sometimes it remains the same. However, we do try, and also when parents are saying it, is that change is something that will happen. We can't always guarantee the same transport, and that can be factors outside of demand. Drivers and passenger assistants get new jobs, they move away, or companies fold, and so there is always that possibility, and that's why we try and manage it as carefully as possible. With some pupils, additional work will be done to sort of manage those changes. In relation to Worcester Wheels, obviously they're on our framework. They competed for work because everything we do goes through our framework. They were unsuccessful, and obviously they lost those particular contracts. Obviously the new operators are now in place. Information that we have is passed on to the new operators. The new operators then have what we call a meet and greet. So before the contract start, the operators will go out and they'll meet the parents. So the parents can meet the passenger assistants, they can see the vehicle that will be transported. And we try and manage the process as carefully as we can. I think that's what we try, what we've learned over the years is that we're not just going to jump in and change transport without people knowing where possible. There are occasions when something's happened on a particular day and we have got to get something in place for the following week. But as a general rule, when we're doing the reviews, we manage that process as carefully as possible. But we have a tendering process that is our 30% quality and the rest is price. And unfortunately, they weren't successful in that current bid.
Okay, thank you. Is there a third one, Matt?
There is a third one. Just following up on that briefly, obviously the risk sometimes is that you bring in a new contract provider and they're not maybe up to scratch. They've maybe, under-promised, kind of this, we can do this for this amount, and they can't. So, and the other danger is that maybe a really good loyal one like Worcester Wheels maybe struggles and then disappears because they can't carry on, and then you've got less choice, and then you might end up paying more in the future. So that's always a risk, but I'm sure you're probably aware of that. So quickly on to the last one, which is kind of around the BSIP funding and all that, and that kind of stuff, because there's a lot of money there coming in over the next few years, and there's kind of probably everyone is after some of that money. And so as I'm in this panel, I'll be kind of speaking on behalf of that, home to school transport side of things, because obviously You know, last year we did the kind of, in December, wasn't it? Yeah, £1, you can go anywhere. Yeah, great at it. Yeah, really like that. I suppose the question is, there's so many different things you can, on demand, you can spend it on that. What is one of our biggest budget pressures? It's home to school transport. And what kind of proportion of that BSIP is going to be put into home to school transport? And maybe is there actually a good reason to maybe focus more on that home to school transport? If this is one that's going to be potentially, if your forecast is right, and it's going up by £6-7 million in a year, and maybe we should put a lot of the BSIP into that to control that. So issues around that. Thank you.
Thank you. So the flexibility of money awarded to us for BSIP, and can we put a portion of that to home school transport?
We are not forecasting to put any particular amount towards home school transport. What we are looking to do through the bus service improvement plan is to improve bus services as a whole. That will have a beneficial effect for home school transport in terms of particularly post-16. So we're looking at wider coverage now because of most people who previously haven't had access to public transport, particularly in rural areas, now have access to public transport through the demand responsive transport thing. And obviously that will give them greater access to any sort of post-16 journey. So that can be onward journey on our core services or to more rural locations, etc. So whilst we are not allocating any specific money towards that, we are looking at how we can improve that. But that does include, obviously, the cost of the 7-card scheme, because the 7-card scheme is a multi-operator ticketing scheme. So that is included in the bus service improvement plan. We are allowed to include that because of how it has been set up. We are working with our operators to look at, that will be part of the, with the operators, like I said, with the colleges, etc., around ticketing fares, so that will be included in that working group to look at, is that the best scheme? Is that there are other schemes that we can do? How does that work in reality? Multi-operator ticketing schemes across the piece. So how do people go from DRT onto public transport and make those wider journeys as well? And how can we make that smoother and more efficiently? Which obviously it has a knock-on effect for people making educational journeys. Increasing the coverage and the frequency of service also gives that ability for people to make those journeys, for education purposes, for employment, etc. So whilst we're not, like I said, apart from the 7-card scheme, or not particularly allocating anything particularly against home school transport, there'll be wider benefits of improvement of bus services for education.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, before I bring you in, just because my question follows on from this really, Justin probably knows what I'm going to say here, but is there a chance that some of the BSIP money could be used to fund, for example, free bus travel for care leavers in the county? I'm not expecting a yes, no, I'm just floating it to make you aware of a discussion that we had at a recent corporate parenting panel, and feedback from young people in that situation have said that transport is a real issue for them and the cost of transport. So if that's something that could be considered, that'd be great. More generally, and then I'll come to you, Anthony, in relation to the BSIP journey planning, can you tell me how elected members are involved in that decision making? Because on a personal level, I don't feel like I have been involved in sort of my ideas and feeding in the ideas of my residents about, in particular, West Malvern, North Malvern, that little section that's not covered quite at the moment by on-demand transport. There's a bit of a black spot. So how can I be better involved in that decision-making, please, and other members too?
That's something, obviously, we're considering at the moment, because we've got guidance, obviously, that around what we can do and can't do with the funding from the Department for Transport, although we are still waiting for further guidance from the Department for Transport around the current funding. But as part of the enhanced partnership, because obviously that's one of the key drivers, we have to work in partnership with our bus operators as well. But that is the sort of almost the decision-making board. So it's how do we feed into that? So we are looking at best practice for what other authorities have done in looking at local members and how we widen that out to what we can do and how you feed back into that. The Malvern one you particularly raised, I think, should now be covered by the DRT, but I can have a chat with you about that afterwards if that's still a part, because I know we've expanded that into sort of wider areas. But yeah, we are at the moment looking at how do we get that feed from local members, and not just local members, but how do we get that from the public, how do we open that up, and we've got some good ideas, but we'll hopefully be able to come back, whether that's at scrutiny panels or whether how we do that will be moving forwards, because we feel that not just through working with the colleges, working with the universities, working with other employment groups and stuff like that, but obviously local members, and how do we get more access from the public? Now we've just sort of agreed on a brand for the Worcestershire for the BSIP, which will be coming out shortly. And through that, there's a lot of thinking about how do we market that, how do we get out there and start those conversations with the general public, as well as to say, what are your requirements? What do you want to see from your bus services? And obviously, how there are areas that they feel are still unserved, or journeys that they still haven't made. So there's, we are luckily we've had some funding to do specific things. We are now at the point where we know that we've got funding for a multi-year program. So now it's about how do we start to engage with people about what we want to do and what we want from them. So yeah. Will become
That's welcome news, actually, because I think you could make much better use of us as local members, because we do have people contacting us all the time, whether that's at our drop-in surgeries or by email about gaps. And I think that the North Malvern service that you're referring to at the moment is actually north of the Malvern Hills district, so that's more out towards Hallow and the rural areas, whereas in the urban area of Housel Road, and I'm going into specifics now, we'll take it offline, but there is still a gap, so let's just leave it there for now. Anthony, you wanted to come in with a question.
Please, thank you very much. Stuart, again, apologies, there's another question for you, but it's not as convoluted as the last one. Electric vehicles, as far as I'm aware, electric vehicles are cheaper to run than petrol or diesel. So first part of the question is, do we put any pressure, or can we put any pressure on the transport providers we have to get them to run more electric vehicles? That's the first part.
We have considered this, but at the moment it's difficult. I think some of our operators are starting to look at hybrid technology and move towards that. Our bus operators are quite keen to move towards electric vehicles, but obviously there's an infrastructure cost around that for converting sort of whole depots. We are ourselves, because obviously we have an internal fleet of vehicles, so we are looking currently at investing in some electric minibuses as well to provide some of our internal transport for homeschool transport. So yes, we are considering it, but at the moment we're not going down the route of trying to enforce. But I know a number of our taxi operators are looking at sort of more hybrid and more self-charging, but obviously the infrastructure seems to be the sort of the area that they come back to us and say, well, that's where their issues is. We can't use any of the sort of BSIP fund at the moment for that, but there have been previous bids from the Department for Transport for electrifying bus depots. So we're still waiting to see if there'll be any further funding allocated for that. But if they are, then we will consider working with our operators to try and see if we can get some of that funding from Worcestershire.
I'm really pleased you made that point, Anthony, because it seems the ideal model to me. You've got your pinch points at the start of the day and the end of the day, and then almost a dormant period where the charging, could take place. You'd think it would be a natural fit. So I'd really welcome looking into that more. And thanks for raising it, Anthony. Did you have another question?
Yeah, just second part of this. I've just had a look at the figures on page 8 as regards mileage bands. It seems that we have under 20 miles and under 61 contracts for that. Has there been any number crunching, or is there any plan to look at it from the point of view of short, medium, long term, to actually introduce more vehicles into the county's fleet to do these short distances as electric vehicles or even as diesel, so we can actually get away from the situation where we're dependent on taxi services?
Yes, is the simple answer to that. We are, at the moment, our fleet does only a very small percentage, and I haven't got the figures to hand, but the last time I looked at it was probably less than sort of 10% of the overall bunch. But we do the significant proportion of the wheelchair accessible transport, around 70 odd sort of percent if my figures are, but I can double check those if you wish. We've sort of gone into that space because it's not there so much in the commercial market. the ability to travel multiple wheelchairs on those sorts of vehicles. So that's what we've predominantly done. But we have just started doing some of the smaller vehicle operations. So looking at areas where we know we don't have provision of taxi operators. So can we do it cheaper? So looking at those sort of things. But that is an ongoing piece of work. Now, at the moment, that's not with electric vehicles, but we are looking at electric vehicles for our homeschool transport, for our internal homeschool transport fleet as we speak.
So just come back on that. I think you said obviously that there isn't much funding around for this sort of thing, but it would make really, to me, a lot of sense to get funding so that we actually brought employment as drivers into local areas to drive electric vehicles, which we owned. That as a cost-saving measure must have some value. I mean, the one thing I don't know from this, looking at it, and I mean, it would be interesting, is how many of those 484,000 journeys I stated earlier actually come under 20 miles and are 20 miles and under.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Thank you, Anthony. Stuart, would you like to answer?
I don't know how many are under across the piece under 20 miles. Probably quite a few. We do, we still provide transport to quite a lot of local schools. There's probably quite a number, but like I said, we are looking at that and how we can move that forwards. And I think there's definitely advances in battery technology and issues. Some of the previous issues, some of the previous sort of vehicles that we'd seen didn't really have the range for a lot of our rural activities, but I think that's definitely changing now. A lot more have much greater range and much more, so it is definitely one for the near future, hopefully.
Yeah, sorry, just to come back on that. I mean, the logic to me is that if you're having to go and find people to bring taxis in from all over the place to do 1, 3, 5 mile journeys, if you've got these people based in Worcester, based in Kidderminster, based in Redditch, etc., how many journeys could they do in the same time as it's bringing someone? You're having to drive someone 20, 30 miles to do a journey. How many journeys could that person do in that time? You could probably do 3 or 4. So, I mean, to me, I would look at it from the point of view that you'd have to look at the figures and see what it tells you. The figures will tell you what you need to know.
I'll just come back on that. Yeah, and that's exactly what we've been doing. We've been looking at those smaller, short-term, high-cost ones that, where operators have come from big distances, so we've been paying more to reduce those. So that's where areas of focus that we've been doing. Not with electric cars at the moment, but with sort of our traditional methods.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Adam, sorry.
Just really briefly, I think you make a compelling spend to save argument. That's essentially what you're outlining, and there's quite a lot of examples in terms of spend to save around this table now, basically. And it's great the economy and infrastructure, Stuart in particular, are going to look at that, and right that they look at that. But again, I feel like the voice of balance today. But it's an important point to make, which is, alongside this, here comes the balance bit. We've got almost £60 million on what is essentially an overdraft, £59 million EFS, and we've got to make some significant inroads there. And as I'm talking, I don't like the words that I'm saying. It's not what I signed up for. It's not my cup of tea, to be perfectly frank with you, but it has to be my cup of tea. It has to be all of our cups of tea in terms of we've got to make some inroads on that. So I think that the balance point I want to make is I'm totally aligned with your spend to save argument, absolutely, but I'm equally aligned to the fact that by significant inroads on £60 million worth of EFS, we've got to be achieving that this financial year as well. So that's the balance that I wanted to point out.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, again, come back. I mean, I think from the point of view, sometimes it seems to me, with central government, you've got to do the thinking for them. Because from the point of view of your just, and this would happen in the business scenario as well, where you've got continually invoice after invoice after invoice hitting your desk. Now, if you've got money, that's funding that you can invest in vehicles, invest in people, it's more than just providing a taxi service. It's providing jobs, it's providing careers, mechanics, etc. It brings the thing to your doorstep. And I mean, I think, like I say, I think central government just really missed the point. All they're doing is chasing the tail all the time.
Okay, thank you. Honest discussion there, and I think if I were to sum it up as a recommendation, I might say consider spend to save initiatives as balanced against current budgetary pressures. Does that sum things up okay? I have people who are more expert than I in the room. But yeah, really good discussion. Any further questions before we try and pull out the recommendations in addition to that little one? You look like you want to speak, Dan. Mike, please.
It's only on the 7-card one. So I've got 2 questions, very different. First question. So how is it comparable, the Zone 1s, when I look at Worcester City versus the Pershore and Upton ones? Because they're very, very different, and we're charging £434 for them. And just as an aside, why is there a Forest Towns one and not something similar for, say, the Upton and the Villages area or the Pershore and the Villages one? Because we're looking at very different kind of sense of scale here, and it's £434. So first question.
The zones have been in operation for a number of years now, and one of the things that we're looking at part of the BSIP and, like I said, in the fares and ticketing scheme is whether those zones are still appropriate. So that is under review as we speak.
Good to hear, because a lot of housing estates are now outside of that Zone 1 for Pershore and also for Upton, so I just wanted to check. Right, bit more of a complicated one, but I'm trying to work out who's paying. So basically, if you've got a 16 to 19-year-old who is from Evesham or Droitwich, they're heading over to the sixth form college because that's the only place they can do things like ancient history, geology, theatre studies, dance, photography, politics, only place they can go. So they want to go and do their A-levels there. Parents are earning under £35,000 a year, which, just for reference, that is one parent earning minimum wage and another one possibly on about 9k a year. So they're not earning a significant sum of money. So as long as they're under that 35k a year, the college will pay for their bus pass. Where's that money coming from? Are they getting the full £840 for a full county or £693 from the government? Are they actually getting that money directly from the government, so as part of a bursary? Or is that actually coming out of money that should be used for their education? Because I've been trying to Google this online and I cannot find any evidence of how much money the government gives as a bursary to the actual college for actually paying for this. And are they paying the full 840 or full 693 in the same way that a resident would?
Good questions. Stuart, have a go at that.
I must admit, I don't know the answer to where the money, where the colleges are getting their money from. That is probably a question for the colleges, but the colleges pay directly for the 7-card scheme, so they'll pay the same as the parents for us.
Okay.
My concern here is that actually we, as a county, need to know that question. We actually do need to know the answer, because I have real problems with taking money out of classrooms to fund a bus service. And I think we do need to actually find that out. Can we actually, I don't want to be calling up sixth form colleges and asking them kind of random questions like this. Can we actually find out how much they're actually receiving from the government? Because actually, if we're robbing one institution to pay another, I just feel like that's actually not quite the best way to operate a system.
Okay, so a recommendation that we try and find out the sum of money that colleges receive directly from government and what that covers. Is it separate travel budget and a separate education budget per student that needs it, or is it robbing Peter to pay Paul, as I think you said? Okay. Nick, just before I bring you in, Sarah, did you want to speak now, or shall I bring Nick in first? Nick, okay.
Funny enough, I had the conversation with the principal of Worcester Sixth Form College a few weeks ago, and I can't remember what he said exactly, but I can send him an email today and just double check that so we can find out quite quickly.
Sure, if we record it as a recommendation and somebody acts on it, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Sarah, do you want to come in now?
On those two things, you are likely to have a difference between Worcester Sixth Form College and the FE colleges because they're different types of organisation. Worcester Sixth Form College is part of an academy trust, and the colleges are further education colleges, but we can certainly find out both of those things. I was going to come in on Councillor Fordington's early question about attainment and transport. And I just think for context, it's important to explain that there is no correlation between distance travelled and attainment outcomes. However, of course, nobody wants any child to be travelling a long distance. The risk is a greater one about actual attendance time, because somebody who has to travel further clearly is going to be more likely to disruption. And just to note on the attainment outcomes, our SEND attainment is actually better than national. So just to complete that question.
Thank you. And if that feels slightly out of context, it's completely my fault because Sarah indicated that she wanted to come in earlier and I forgot. So, but thank you, and thanks for reminding us that you wanted to speak. Okay. Do we have, I need to put my glasses back on. Do we have any further questions on this paper? Or, okay, Dan.
Love Google. There is a direct correlation, sorry, because I have actually sat through this. There is a direct relationship between distance travelled and attainment, because I've had to sit through a discussion about this, and I can happily send over the research papers that I've got here, because I know there is a direct correlation.
This is like an episode of University Challenge. I have Sarah's finger poised over the buzzer. Do you want to say? Yeah.
Sorry, I should have been more complete in my response. There isn't a direct correlation with our Worcestershire data at this point and distance travelled.
Good distinction to make, thank you. Right, shall we draw this conversation to a close now then and capture recommendations? But first of all, thank you very much to everybody for presenting papers today and for answering our questions. You will always rely on us to be quite a robust and challenging committee, but hopefully it hasn't been too painful experience for you, Stuart, and you will come back. And thank you to members for all of the interesting questions that you asked, and for Cabinet members as well for your input today. I feel like I'm closing the meeting when I'm not. So we've got some recommendations captured, I think there, Sam, haven't we? So one around invest to save where we can, or consideration of that. One around increased member engagement in BSIP planning and decision making. Something around looking at free bus travel for care leavers, when that is a possibility. Did you capture anything else, Sam?
Just the last point about clarifying where the post-16 transport funding comes from. But of course, that was the 4.
Fantastic. Some really good recommendations, I think, have come out there. So thank you again for that really interesting discussion. We're going to move on to agenda item 7, which is a refresh of our work programme. So, Justin, you want to speak? Yeah.
Chair, it's just before you go on to work plan, it's a request really for the panel in the context of your future work plan. If I could just take a couple of minutes, is that okay?
Yeah, I would have thought so. Yes, go for it.
Thank you. I saw that on the future work plan you will be looking at fostering. So my request is very simple. Nationally, I'm sure the panel are aware, there has been a decline for many years in the number of fostering households. And although that decline, I think, has slowed in recent years, it's continuing. The government's response to that has been, or is to effectively try to regionalise foster care through regional care cooperatives and fostering hubs. That is what is coming through. You'll be aware as a panel that a year ago we began in Worcestershire what I describe as a fostering revolution against that national context of declining fostering households. Today I can tell the panel that we've got the first year results in from our fostering revolution. And whereas nationally the number of fostering households continues to decline, in Worcestershire we have achieved a net increase in the number of fostering households. So that is after you take out foster carers leaving the service, which happens, a net increase of 25% in the number of mainstream fostering households. These are spectacular results, and it's a direct consequence and result of what we are doing here in Worcestershire. So my request for this panel is to find a place in the not too distant future where you can look at what it is that we are doing here in Worcestershire that has set such a standard for fostering that can be shared with other local authorities to try and help the government in their future approach to fostering, because the danger is that they have embarked on a course which, although it might work in certain areas, for counties like Worcestershire, it will not. And what we have done is take our local circumstances to transform fostering, and it is working spectacularly. So I'd appreciate the opportunity for that to be brought to this panel.
You're already in September. So, but thank you. The information you've just shared with us bodes really well for an interesting sort of update there. Yes, so we've got an update on fostering strategy service, including therapeutic fostering on the agenda for our September meeting. So we look forward to that discussion then. And also how, I'm always interested in percentages, but what number that correlates to as an actual sort of, I don't want to use the word placement, but as a home for young people, that would be brilliant. Thanks. Okay,
I can give you that straight off.
Okay.
We've gone from 88 foster homes a year ago. We're now up to 110, and we've got another 8 being assessed. So we are continuing on that journey.
That's great. Thank you. And on a personal level, as I sit on the Children and Families Scrutiny Committee at the Local Government Association, I will share our best practice as part of that, which gets fed up directly to government. So thank you. Okay, so any other suggestions around the work plan to be made after Justin's input? No?
I think you set up the next 2 meetings.
Yeah, so we have full agendas as usual in our next 2 meetings, but the information is in your packs. Hopefully I'll be sitting here in the chair. Who knows what might happen between now and then. But all that's left for me to say is thank you all for your attendance and active participation in another full and interesting meeting. Date of our next meeting is Thursday, the 2nd of July at 10 o'clock here in Pershore. Enjoy the rest of your day.